Something knocks on my window every night. It started when my family and I moved into a very rundown house in the middle of nowhere. I can still remember the house. Its withered green wood siding was starting to rot due to years of neglect and harsh conditions. The window frames were covered in paint chips, rust and dirt, and the glass itself was coated in a thick layer of dust and debris. Even the land surrounding the property was starting to show years upon years of isolation, with nature fighting to reclaim the land. Yet this house was the only one that my parents could afford. My dad opened up his own restaurant in the town with the hopes of business picking up so we could save up for future renovations. Both my parents were constantly focused on managing the restaurant, so I was left to handle my two younger siblings. Jane and Nico were twins who had just turned 6. They were already starting to become slightly rebellious and were questioning my authority over them, or at least Nico was. Honestly, I can't remember what life was like before them, nor do I want to. I can't believe I spent 5 years being an only child with 2 overworked parents. The 3 of us shared this pretty strange room on the first floor. It was 2 rooms connected to each other with another door that was bolted shut and painted over. It connected to a 3rd room which was considered a guest room that had another entrance. My dad decided against it because it was soon going to be rented out for a family member and he wanted to give them more privacy. My bed was on the room on the very far end, while my siblings' beds were placed side by side with a large window in between. My room had 2 windows, with my bed being placed right beside the windowless wall. The first week since moving in went by pretty uneventful. My mom would make our meal of the day and leave it for us to heat up the rest of the day. I would spend my day watching over them and making sure the house didn't burn down. We didn't have phones nor computers at the time, so being a 10-year-old, I would simply play outside with them until the sun went down. We never strayed far from our house, choosing to stay within the small open area in our backyard. The summer heat was so brutal that the woods near us were completely silent, probably burnt out by the dry heat in the air. Or so we thought. By the time my parents came back from the restaurant, I had already gotten the rest of us ready for bed. This was my new routine. It was my way of helping. I was about to close my eyes when I heard a soft knock on the window. It was so soft that I wasn't even sure if it was a knock at first. So I just laid there, listening. The once annoying chirping of the crickets and the wind chimes in the distance had now gone fully silent. I chalked up the knocking to my imagination and turned to face the wall, closing my eyes and preparing to drift asleep. This time, the knocks had gone even louder. I jolted up, fully awake by now, and sat up in my bed. I was about to walk over to the window when I realized that I could see the glow of the moon casting the outline of a figure against the curtain of my window. The figure appeared to be an elderly woman standing right outside, trying to peer in. I could see the figure hunched over, with strands of hair coming down the side of her face. I wanted to rip open the curtains and yell at her to go away, thinking it was some noisy neighbor. But as I looked down, I saw something that made every hair on my body stand up. Where its fingers should have been stood large knife-like digits that stretched down to her waist. As I looked further down, I could also sort of make out that its legs were similar to that of some sort of animal standing up, like if someone were to stick the hind legs of a deer or a goat onto an old woman. I sat there, completely petrified, just staring down at the figure across my room. The only thing that protected me was a couple centimeters of glass and fabric. I wasn't even all that sure if he could see me, but it was like it felt my presence. It must have been a couple of minutes before its head snapped back and scampered away, like it was interrupted by something or someone. I quickly got up and bolted to my siblings' room, closing the door behind me and sliding a basket in front of the door. I grabbed a bat from their closet and quickly went to the front of my siblings' room to make sure the lock was secure. I quietly crawled into my brother's bed with him, gripping the bat so tight that my muscles were starting to get tired. I didn't get an ounce of sleep that night. I just laid there thinking about every possible scenario and what I could do to make sure that thing didn't break in. I was too scared to go out into the hallway and upstairs to my parents' bedroom, because I knew they never locked any of the doors when they came into the house. Hell, sometimes they would leave the back door wide open. For all I knew, that thing could be inside the house. Hours went by and I waited until I heard my parents in the kitchen. Their voices had carried me through the living room, causing me to get up and bolt towards them. "Mom! Dad! Someone tried to break in last night!" I wanted to scream it out loud, but my siblings were still asleep. "What do you mean?" my mother asked as she scraped the eggs off the pan and into a container with her spatula. "Are you sure it wasn't just a dream? Who the hell would come up here?" my father questioned, his tone hinting a slight annoyance. "I swear, I bet they left footprints right outside my window. We can go check it out," I insisted. "How long until breakfast is ready?" my father asked as he took a sip from his black coffee. Only real men drank black coffee. That's what he would always said. "Another half hour. I have to finish the kids' meals for today, but you can go and check what he's talking about." "Alright, boy. Let's go check on what you're saying. You better not be lying about this." We went through the kitchen back door and went around the house until we stood facing my bedroom window. My father knelt over the footprints that were left on the dirt. The foot tracks had come from the thick line of trees and right outside my window. It's as if it just stood to watch before going back into the forest. "What did they look like?" my father asked while tracing the outline of the footprint with a small stick. "It looked like an old woman," I said, not exactly going into full detail with the monstrosity of its appearance. I didn't need them to blow me off and thinking I was going insane. "An old woman?" He raised an eyebrow at me. "Yes, sir. It looked like an old woman tapping on my window," I said firmly, hoping that he would believe me. "You mean to tell me that an old woman came through the forest just to knock on your window and leave? He questioned in a completely serious tone. Fuck. He wasn't gonna believe me. I don't know her intentions. All I know is that she was there, I stated firmly. Okay, because based on what I'm seeing, it looks like some sort of deer came up here and you were probably dreaming. You just had a nightmare. It's a brand new environment and you're young, so you probably got scared. No, I swear. Enough. We already have too much on our plate without you having to make up some stories. We don't need you scaring your siblings. Now listen, why don't we go back inside and you can tell everyone that you saw a deer and forget about it, okay? As much as I knew that it wasn't okay, I couldn't argue against him. So I just nodded while he gripped the back of my neck and we went back inside to eat. The day went by quick as my siblings and I watched movie after movie. I decided to keep them inside just in case. It was a good thing too, because soon it had started to rain. That night, I got them ready for bed, but I made sure to lock every single door. I kept my bed next to my bed, and once again, I just lay there trying to keep my eyes open, just in case. Eventually, my exhaustion had reached the best of me, and I had fallen asleep. Days had gone by, and I had forgotten all about the incident until one specific day. My parents had gotten home early due to some holiday, so we sat around eating dinner. We sat around the table awkwardly, trying to make small talk, but there was nothing much to talk about. School hadn't started, so every day had started to blur into one, with the same boring routine that we had. By the end of the meal, however, my mother said something strange that made me freeze up. Oh, and make sure to close the back door when we leave. And always leave your dirty shoes in the kitchen. The other night I saw muddy footprints from outside coming to your bedroom. I had to mop it up at night. My father shot me a dirty look while my mother continued to lecture us. You know better, Elio. You're not a little kid anymore. You have to keep the house clean, he reiterated. That wasn't me. I told you guys that someone was around the house. I tried arguing, but my father held up his hand to shut me up. Enough. We don't need you making up any of these stories. I'm not lying. I swear I saw someone, I continued. Who? Nico's little voice chimed in excitedly. When? Jane asked, trying to mask her fear, but her voice had gotten a little higher. Nothing. Your brother saw a deer outside of his window and thinks he saw someone. Oh! Jane sighed, her posture noticeably becoming relaxed. My brother began to laugh like it was the most hysterical thing he's ever heard. Wow! Elio's scared of deers? He continued to mock me. See? You're not scared of deers, are you, Nico? My father asked jokingly. No, Dad, I'm not scared of deers like Elio, my brother replied confidently. I wanted to argue back, but I didn't have the energy to fight back against my parents, so I decided to shut up and finish my dinner in peace. That night, I laid restless while staring out the window. It was pitch black, so I couldn't see anything through the curtain, but I swear I could almost hear scratches on the window. The following week flew by, and my paranoia only increased every time the sun set. I would lock us up in our rooms and wait until I heard the voices of my parents when they entered the house at night. Once in a while, my mother would try to enter our rooms to check upon us, but the locks would prevent the door from opening, so I would only hear the jiggle of the door handle. I was too paranoid to open it at night. One day, I decided to take a nap earlier than usual. My parents had decided to not open the restaurant because it was a religious holiday and everyone would be indoors. I fell asleep in my bed when I heard the slight creak of a floorboard. I rolled over on my side when I got a whiff of a vile odor. It smelled like something had died and been dragged through a sewer. My eyes were slowly opening by now and adjusting to my surroundings. It was pretty dark, but I could see my mother walking towards me. She reached out to touch my forehead and I closed my eyes again. Her wet, scaly, cold hands provided a nice feeling in contrast to the heat of the room. It wasn't until I felt her large fingernails lightly scratch my neck that I realized something was wrong. My eyes snapped wide open and I let out a horrified scream as I kicked back at the figure. That thing's wide eyes began to open wide as she smiled, exposing a large set of shark-like teeth. I rolled to my side and fell down to the floor alongside with all the blankets while facing my siblings' room. The main door slammed wide open and my entire family came rushing in.
Boy, what do you think you're doing on the floor? And why are you screaming?
My father barked. Son, are you okay? Son, are you okay? My mother asked gently.
I saw her again. She's back. She was in the room.
I screamed. Who? Jane asked while trying to hide behind my father.
Boy, not this again. There is no one in the room. I know what I saw.
I looked around me, but the room was empty. The only thing different was that the window was wide open.
She came in through the window. She opened the window and climbed in.
I shouted back, hoping that they would notice. Sweetie, I opened the window earlier. I noticed that you were feeling quite warm. I think you had a fever dream. She rationalized it in a soothing voice, but she was failing.
I had enough of this. Son, you gotta get your act together. You're too old to be making up stories. You're just freaking everyone out.
I promised that I wasn't making anything up, I said, in between my blubbering. Alright, you can sleep in our room if you want, my mother said, while trying to defuse the situation.
No!
I yelled out. I knew that if I went upstairs, she would somehow find a way to enter in without anyone else knowing. Are you sure? My mother asked.
You heard him, Maria. The boy is too old to be sleeping with mommy. You cuddle him too much.
He shook his head in annoyance and left the room with the twins trailing behind him. Alright, I'll bring back some tea and some medicine so you can go back to sleep, my mother said, while trying to put me back to bed. After they all left, I quickly ran up and shut the window and locked it. I ran towards my siblings' room and grabbed my bed and slid it under the sheets with me. My mother tried to give me the medicine and the tea, but I knew they would only make me drowsy, so I told her I would drink it later. Instead, I left it on the table and lay down, watching the small nightlight in the corner of the room. I wanted to figure out what the hell that thing wanted. Was it demonic? Some sort of monster? An alien? Why did it only target me? No one else seemed to see anything. Could the former owners know something about it? The possibilities distracted me long enough, until my siblings were tucked into their beds by my mother. I got up quietly and walked over to their room and locked our main door. I then walked back to my bed and lay there, counting down the hours until the sun rose. This was my new nightly routine. It went on for about another week, with little to no sleep. Eventually, the stress had exacerbated whatever sickness I had gotten, and I had to be taken to the hospital after I collapsed one morning in front of my parents. I woke up in the hospital bed as the sun had started to set. I laid in bed all groggy with all the medications and the bright white lights. I must have been in and out of sleep, because when I blinked, I looked at the clock and it said it was 3 a.m. Fuck. I quickly jolted awake and tried to get out of the hospital bed, feeling a slight sting from my wrists as the IV detached itself from my arms. The alarm went off and a nurse ran into my room. "Whoa, kid, you have to rest. You're recovering from a bad case of pneumonia. You're under a little bit of stress. We've talked to your parents and they will come in the morning. You're fine, baby." "No, you don't understand," I cried out while hyperventilating. "My parents never closed the back door. My siblings don't know how to close the main door. I haven't told them yet. I was supposed to tell them." "What do you mean?" she asked. The lady comes in at night. She has goat legs and really big claws. I think she wants to hurt us." Okay. Why don't we go and make a phone call to your parents so you can tell them yourself? Would that be okay?" She wrapped her arms around me, providing a sense of comfort and warmth that I hadn't felt in a while. It left me speechless, and I merely nodded my head. We walked over to the main hallway and stood next to a desk, where she picked up the phone and dialed it. She waited for a bit and dialed again. And again. And again. "Baby, I think it's pretty late. I'm sure they are asleep. They said they're gonna be here early in the morning. I will leave them a message here to call me as soon as possible. Is that okay?" I started to tear up, but she quickly hugged me while providing words of comfort that did nothing to raise my spirits. We walked back to the patient room where she tucked me into bed, and I quickly fell asleep. The next morning, I awoke to see several police officers and my aunt Sylvie, who lived on the other side of the country. Her eyes were bright red, but she looked so relieved to see me. "Elio, I'm so glad you're okay," she cried out while gripping onto me tightly. "Aunt, what are you doing here?" I asked while looking around at the police officers who were trying to avoid my eyes. "Oh, sweetie, there's been an accident." An accident?" I asked, my face scrunching up in confusion. "Last night there was..." She sobbed and put her hands to her face and quickly looked up at the ceiling before taking a deep breath. "Last night there was a fire at your house. Okay? Your parents and siblings loved you so much," she stated, while trying to remain composed. I don't understand. I saw them yesterday. They were fine." She looked at me and grabbed onto my hand as tightly as she could. "Sweetie, they passed away. They passed away in the fire. But I saw them. I saw them yesterday," I repeated. She merely shook her head, and several tears began to fall from her eyes, breaking me from my trance of denial. I began to feel a clump in the back of my throat, and eventually I laid my head in between her arms and cried out. We held onto each other, just crying. I eventually recovered. My aunt took me into her household across the country. It was pretty difficult trying to manage the rest of my years without my family. I had a couple mental breakdowns here and there, and several therapists helped me walk through my grief. The goat lady incident was chalked up to being parentified at such a young age. But once I turned 18, I decided to seek closure and began to search through the case records of what happened when I was a child. According to the files, the fire started due to a gas leak from the kitchen. They found the remains of 2 adults in the bedroom upstairs, but nothing from the 2 younger ones. They think the fire burned so hot from downstairs that there was nothing to find. But I don't believe that. I don't think my siblings died in that fire. I tried to search for any information pertaining to the former owners of the house, but all the records were sealed or lost. This was a time before computers were widely available, so nothing was digitalized. I wanted to go back to that house and investigate further, but time went on, and I went to college, got married, and had my kids. Eventually, I came to an acceptance that what happened was in the past. I had to move on, so I did. I moved to another country and bought a beautiful house that was in the suburbs not far away from our major city. Years went by and my kids had grown the same age as Nico and Jane once were. I had 2 kids named Nikki and James in memory of my siblings. My wife was the one that came up with the idea. They even acted just like them. It was uncanny. Nikki was so bold and outspoken for a 9-year-old girl, and James was so quiet, shy, and fearful. He was always following around his big sister, hiding behind her from every little sound. The only reason I am retelling what happened in my childhood is because a couple nights ago my daughter woke us up with her shrieks. She said there was someone right outside her window trying to peer in. I checked outside and saw nothing. I brought both my kids to our bedroom in order to comfort them and let them sleep with us. I wanted to go back to sleep, but I couldn't get the feeling that something was wrong out of my head. So I got back up and went to check the security cameras to see if there was truly anything there. I turned up the monitor on and skipped forward to the exact time frame, and what I saw made my heart drop to my stomach. The same figure that had haunted me when I was a child had sprouted from the darkness of the trees that lined up the park and walked over slowly to our house. As it got closer to our house, I could see it open the side gate and enter in as quietly as it could, with each hoof marching in forward. It had the same slick, wet, blonde hair coming down from the side of its face, the white dirty fur that covered its goat legs, and the large knife-like digits from its hands. Its eyes were completely white, and it looked at the camera and shot a wide smile as it walked up to my daughter's window. It started tapping it lightly and scurried away the moment we turned on our daughter's bedroom light on. I don't know how it found me, but I will do whatever I can to protect my family. Do you have any idea of what it could be?